Welcome back to Animal Songs, a story set to music, written and performed by Jamie Holcomb. What happened in the past stays in the past, right? Well, we can only learn by experience. Memories inform our present choices. I wonder, what is remembered and held on to? What is meant to be forgotten and unlearned? I wonder. Sit back, relax, and watch the show, in your head, on screen, through the dots of your own eyes. Incubating in the earth. Hidden pathways weave and tangle, dissolve and refresh. Alimentation. Worm. The man who would become Pinocchio Seen-Warshaw was born several hundred miles to the east of the river in a land whose history is more ancient than human records. His hometown, Pierrot Bay, has a legendary founder, Crispin, the patron of artists, cataloger of medicinal herbs, and most famously the discoverer of the alphabet. Young Pinocchio grew up in a straw house just 2 blocks away from the shrine of Crispin, a sandstone ziggurat, an angular pyramid composed of 5 square levels diminishing to a peak, a temple erected, so they say, on the site of Crispin's battle with a dragon, where the hero punched his famous oversized right fist into the monster's jaw and knocked out its teeth, giving birth to the first system of runes. Those shattered fangs fell into order on the ground, opening a portal to another world, as the story goes. Young Pinocchio would often visit Crispin's shrine, and he spent many hours exploring the catacombs below, hoping that he might find that magic place and so be transported far away from his ordinary life. Senor Seen-Warshaw was a swineherd. He spent most of his time in the pig pens behind their straw house, tending to his animals. He was a solitary man who spoke little. His wife had died giving birth to their son. At night he drank. The man and the boy would sit on opposite ends of their small, round table, a cracked piece of wood, and they would share a meal of preserved hams or sausages, bread, whatever vegetables they had in stock, which the boy was responsible for preparing and were usually served raw, and of course they would share a bottle of wine. Senor Seen-Warshaw drank from the bottle, and his son, eventually, as sons will do, asked the man if he might join his father. With his occasional allowance, Pinocchio bought his own personal tin mug, and from this he would sip his portion of wine and keep his father company. In the morning, when the pigs were ready, they did the butchering. It took place in the barn, on the opposite side of their small field, far from the pig pens. Pinocchio learned at an early age how to bind the pig's feet to one another, how the rope must then be wound tightly around the body so that the legs would not break. When the pig was secure, they would feed the tail of the rope through a pulley on the ceiling, and Senor Seen-Warshaw would haul the pig up so that it hung vertically, writhing and screaming. Then he would secure the rope around a hook on the wall, and Pinocchio also learned to tie this anchoring knot. The boy was not the only son of a swineherd in Pierrot Bay, and at school, which he attended infrequently, he learned from his classmates the spirit of this ritual, how their jolly fathers soothed the pig and made jokes, and how they thanked death and life for their hilarious cruelty. The most religious fathers would burn incense and pray. Everyone thanked the pig. Senor Seen-Warshaw said nothing. He raised his brutal dagger and grimaced. Like that, he cut into the pig's neck, and the only sound was the animal's frantic, weakening screams and the splatter of blood on the barn floor. Once, only once, Pinocchio tried to thank the pig. Just as his father raised his dagger, his leathery face contorted in that brutal grimace, Pinocchio had clapped his hands and said, in barely a whisper, "Thank you for your sacrifice." He'd shut his eyes, expecting to hear the whines and the splash of blood. Instead, there was a metallic clatter, and when he opened his eyes, he barely had time to understand the red fangs flying at him before he felt the impact. The left side of his face was a swollen, purple and green mess for weeks after. He never offended his father again. It was only natural that a boy raised by such a stoic, straightforward man would seek out some explanation for the world around him. His father instructed him in the superficial routines of life, and the meanings behind these actions were left to the boy to interpret. He first sought understanding at the school. The children were packed into one room filled with long wooden benches and tables, and they had ample time to discuss their developing understanding of the world. But poor Pinocchio's life was so different from the experiences of the other boys and girls, with their pious, irreverent fathers and their doting, generous mothers, that the stories his classmates conveyed may as well have been fairy tales taking place in some fanciful realm, inaccessible to boys like himself. These stories were nice to dream about, but they could hardly take place in or have any bearing on the real life of Pinocchio Seen-Warsha. The lessons which the schoolmaster contributed were even less helpful. Pierrot Bay is the inheritor of a once highly developed culture that has decayed, as all things will, over time. The children are fed a plethora of facts gathered by generations of rational scientists, which are assembled into various subjects. They learned systems of mathematical proofs that once rocked the world for their demonstration of previously invisible and misunderstood forces. Likewise, their table of chemical components, a kind of chart of the elements which once woke the world, bleary-eyed and bewildered at the dazzling detail, at once immensely complicated and staggeringly simple, at work in the world behind the scenes, this chart was now, more or less, a list of words in a dead language. All the knowledge that the thin, spectacled man at the front of the room proclaimed as he tugged on the tails of his overly long, greasy mustache, these facts were cold articles for memorization and regurgitation. Little Pinocchio did not understand their importance, and nothing he learned in school helped him to interpret the screaming pigs or his father's grimace or his own swollen purple cheek. Then one day, around the time that his bruise was healing, he decided not to return home. It was the afternoon, and school had just let out. Pinocchio trudged along the dirt street, past the straw houses and adjoining fields, until he reached a fork in the road. To the right, where he would normally turn, he could see his father's house, and he heard the distant squeal of the pigs. If he continued straight, however, he would reach the mysterious sandstone shrine. Everyone in Pierrot Bay knows about their legendary founder, and every day young Pinocchio saw the distant yellow peak of his shrine. The place had always been just another fact to him. Pierrot Bay is on the sea, his father butchers pigs, E equals MC squared, and the shrine of Crispin is 2 blocks ahead. Maybe he had exhausted every other avenue to understanding, and this was his last desperate attempt at finding some meaning. Truly, the boy did not know why he continued straight that day. He simply did not feel like going home. Today, he was going to try something new. If he upset his father, what else could he do to him? Head held high, his heart suddenly full of a resolve that was unfamiliar to the quiet boy, Pinocchio marched down the road to the wide sandstone steps. The shrine loomed over him, and the many points of its 5 layers looked like a soldier's helmet, and indeed the military modeled their uniforms on these imposing religious forms. Pinocchio immediately felt a reverence that he recognized as the feeling he sought. This place meant something. He mounted the stone plaza and bowed his head as he entered the arched doorway. Inside was a dark room. 4 thick columns stood in the center, and on each one there hung a torch in the mouth of a dragon-shaped sconce of thin iron. These flickering flames were the only source of light. On the walls were hieroglyphs depicting Crispin, in his curled cap and winged shoes, enormous right fist held like a hammer over his head, and the dragon, a rather cartoonish character with a vulpine snout and vertically slitted eyes popping out of his head. The whole story was told over the 4 walls, starting on the left with Crispin's arrival at the bay, leading to the dragon on the center wall, and their battle on the right. Pinocchio read the walls, and when he turned around, he was greeted by the conclusion. On the back wall, laid out around the arched doorway, was the first runic alphabet. Floral letters interwove in a pattern that, to Pinocchio, resembled a field, a prairie, a manicured garden. The figures danced in the firelight. As he was familiar with the legend, Pinocchio implicitly understood the artistic arrangement of the world-transporting runes framing the doorway, which glowed white with sunlight. He was beholding the portal. At once he felt a kind of awe at this vision and a profound sadness at the truth. This runic portal led nowhere but back to his everyday world. Yet, after a few hours spent sitting in the empty shrine, cross-legged before the display of runes, when the white light of the portal eventually turned orange and Pinocchio crossed back through it, his world was not the same. He arrived home just as his father was entering through the back door. They exchanged a meaningful look, but the man said nothing. He pulled off his muddy boots, wiped his hands on his thick corduroy work pants, and set about his nighttime routine. First, he crossed to the cupboard and removed from the shelf a bottle of dark wine. Then he sat at the table where a deck of cards waited for him. Normally, he would play a personal game, practice shuffling, or gamble with himself. Tonight, he distributed a second hand across the table. Pinocchio watched all this from the doorway until his father looked up at him. He took his seat, and his father filled the tin cup on the table, and they played a silent game of cards. Finally, the father asked about dinner. Pinocchio laid his hand on the table and grabbed plates and sausages and carrots from the pantry. Once he'd arranged these ingredients into a paltry meal, he asked his father about the shrine. "So that's where you were," said old Seen-Warsha. Pinocchio nodded. If you're interested in the priesthood, the man watched his son shake his head. Well, just make sure you get something useful out of it. That's how Pinocchio got his permission to study at the shrine. After that, he almost never went to school. He would stay and help his father in the mornings, and the old man couldn't have cared less about school and was glad to have the help. Then, after a quick lunch of bacon and bread, Pinocchio would venture to the shrine, armed with his leather-bound notebook and stub of lead. He would sit before the mural of runes and draw. Perhaps some arrangement of these signs would reveal the portal, or at least he would come to understand the meaning of the story and of the runes themselves. What was the power of these marks, and why were they so important to his people? It wasn't long before he caught the attention of the shrine attendant. The monks in Piro Bay lived in a monastery on the seaside cliffs. They have many tasks, including the upkeep of the various shrines around the city. Part of their duty is to remain unseen and so be more like the soul itself. Visitors are meant to behold the well-kept shrine with its attendant laurels and incense and feel the power of an invisible hand at work in this world. However, it's not often that a visitor comes to see a shrine every day. Most people simply kneel and pray. They don't spend hours contemplating the marks on the walls. Brother Orion Daly was blessed with the duty of Crispin. It was he who lit the torches in the dragon sconces, who swept the plaza in secret, who filled the hidden censers with smoldering incense. He took notice of the dutiful boy who came every day to study the myth of the runes. They were the two devotees of Crispin. It was only natural that he should reveal himself to the disciple and help to guide him. So one afternoon, Brother Daly emerged from the stone wall, broom in hand, and he introduced himself to the startled young patron. "Why do you come here so often?" "I'm sorry, sir." Pinocchio fell prostrate on the stone. The monk laughed. "Save that for the shrine, which I've noticed you completely ignore." He pointed at the wall displaying the dragon and the small altar full of dried laurels. "I want to understand the runes, sir." "You mean you don't know how to read?" "No, sir, I can read. I mean the magic." Brother Daly pulled on his sharp black beard and considered the boy and the pattern of signs on the wall behind him. With its connected leather strap, he secured his totem broom to his back. Then he crossed his hands inside the large sleeves of his brown robes, the monk's sacred posture, and he said, "Follow me." He led Pinocchio to the wall and walked straight at the image of Crispin. He passed through it. The boy had not realized it, but the body of the hero, which he had believed to be painted, was in fact an alcove. He grinned and hopped through the wall. On the other side, Brother Daly held a torch. He led the boy down a winding staircase into a maze of tunnels. "These are the catacombs," said the monk in a hushed voice. "It is easy to get lost down here." He led Pinocchio around a corner to a locked wooden door. From Brother Daly's rope belt there hung a copper key ring, and with one of the dangling implements he unbolted the door. "This is Crispin's library." The room was a round cave sculpted in the earth. Several bookcases framed the dirt wall, and these were filled with scrolls and colorful felt covers. The whole room smelled like musty paper. Brother Daly ushered the boy to the reading table at the center where there stood a single stool. "Only the attendant of Crispin is meant to read these stories," said the monk. He waited for Pinocchio to take his seat. "I believe you are as much an attendant of Crispin as I am." The young Warshaw lowered himself onto the stool. He felt the depression in the wood, worn from generations of seated devotees. The table, too, bore shallow divots dug by the elbows of 1,000 or more dedicated scholars. A fat volume fell on the table with a thunderous grunt. Brother Daly smiled down at the boy. "If you want to understand magic, that's the best place to start." He pulled a brass candelabra from one of the shelves and set it on the table. Then he waved his torch across the wicks, creating 5 flickering flames. He bowed and crossed to the door. "I'll leave it unlocked for you in the afternoon." He winked. "And if you have any questions..." He waved his torch to indicate the shelves surrounding the boy. Laughing, he exited the room and closed the creaking, ancient door behind him. The excitement that young Warshaw felt as he sat there beholding the sacred tome would require several volumes to accurately describe. Simply put, the answer to everything, to his life, the pigs, his father, and to the mystery of the realm beyond this world was contained within these pages. Somewhere, if he read far enough, if he was brave and responsible and clever enough, he would discover the secret. The book cover was a faded olive green, turned somewhat metallic with age. In its center, in sparkling gold ink, there was stamped a symbol which the boy did not recognize. Heart racing, he opened the cover. He was greeted by a full-color illustration of Crispin battling the dragon. "Here we go," he said. He turned the page and he began to read a story he had heard 100 times. The book recounted the legend of Crispin, and when Pinocchio had finished the chapter, he sighed. He had learned nothing new. "Maybe tomorrow when I read the next one." Another illustration divided the stories from each other, and this image depicted an underwater landscape in which a monstrous fish lurked in a bed of dark seaweed. The scene was not familiar to Pinocchio Seen Warshaw, and though he felt somewhat disappointed by today's offering, his excitement still flickered. The library was a sacred place, and he, this boy, right here in reality, was on a legendary quest. "I will find the answer," he whispered for the first time, these words that were to become his solemn vow. Then, with 5 gentle breaths, he blew out the candelabra. He felt along the wall, and he found his way out of the darkness back to the everyday world, where the sun was just beginning to set. When he arrived home, once again he came through the front door as his father came through the back. They sat at their rickety, splintering table, played cards and drank wine, ate dinner, and eventually Pinocchio fell asleep in his chair. Like every other night, Senor Seen Warshaw picked up the boy and carried him to his cot in the corner of the room. He covered the boy with the thick camel hair blanket he, the father, had inherited from his father, like the pig farm, which one day would be passed on to his son too. "Nothing," the man whispered. He turned away quickly and didn't finish the thought. From deep in his dreams, the boy heard his father's subtle lament, and, still asleep, he breathed the same sad word. The next day, father and son tended the pigs. Pinocchio scarfed down a lunch earlier than usual, and he raced to the shrine of Crispin. He passed through the hero's body, down to the catacombs, into the sacred library. The door was open, and the candelabra on the table was already lit for him. He clapped his hands and mumbled a quick thank you to the forces of life and death. Then he took his seat and dove into the pages of his mysterious tome. Today's story concerned a fish called Gabalua. It was a kind of nursery rhyme. Quatrains and couplets conveyed the life of a little fish who wished to be a whale with a repeating refrain. "Be careful, Gabalua, you're a little fish, and it might not be good to make such a great wish." The little fish tried everything in a fish's power to become a whale. He ate huge quantities of seaweed, but he just became sick and sluggish. He tried to imitate the way whales will swim to the surface to breathe, hoping the answer to their great size was in the air up there. But of course, when he broke from the water, he nearly suffocated, for his gills would not work in the pure air. Finally, he resolved to seek out the Sea King, the trident-wielding lord of the waters. The fish cried and fell on his fins before the king. He begged, saying that he would trade anything if he could only become a mighty whale. He was a little fish and he hated being small, always in danger of being eaten by this or that. All he wanted was to be a great big whale. He would trade anything. After a moment's consideration, the Sea King agreed. With his sharp trident, he skewered Gabalua and ate him raw. Now this god spoke to the audience. Someday the soul of Gabalua would become a whale. Of course, it wasn't up to anyone to say when. The poem ends with the Sea King crunching the fish bones while a choir of fish repeat the refrain. "Where is the answer?" said Warshaw, and he slammed the book shut. He opened his personal leather-bound journal to consult his transcription of the runes. What did this story have to do with Crispin, and what did either of them have to do with real, honest magic? He began to put together a few clues, some recurring symbols here, a similar thread of death there. He repeated his vow, "I will find the answer." Once again, he blew out the candles and felt his way through the darkness to return home as the sun set. This routine repeated many times. Seasons changed and the days grew shorter, so that the boy emerged from darkness into night. He read story after story, understanding some things, but waiting angrily for the satisfaction he sought. He still attended the slaughter with his father several times a week, but where he had once beheld the struggling pig with horror, he now regarded the animal with disdain. "Quit your whining," he whispered into the writhing pig's ear. Seen Warshaw's eyes went wide and his mouth fell open, and for a moment he glanced at the curved blade in his hand, though he did not know why. His son was already untying the anchor knot, lowering the animal, and there was no time to get lost in one's thoughts. They butchered the animal and carried the portions to the smokehouse, a shed behind the barn, where they hung hams and deposited bacon strips into salt barrels. The man watched the boy and wordlessly contemplated the scowl on his son's face. Brother Daly, too, had noticed the change in his disciple. He was as dutiful and studious as ever, but his frustration radiated from him like a sour fume. "It will pass," muttered the monk as he watched the boy in his storm cloud depart into the night. "Everyone, sometimes." Still, Pinocchio's vow was sincere. He would not give up his quest. It was time, he felt, to begin exploring new avenues. Crispin was real. The runes were real. Shouldn't the portal be possible to discover? "What I need," Pinocchio whispered to himself, a new habit that did worry his silent, watchful guardian, "is the rest of the dragon." He looked up from his table into the cold void of the catacombs. That is how he began his practice. From then on, when he arrived at the shrine, he would pass through Crispin's body, down to the attendant's library, read a selection from the sacred text, and make a few notes in his journal. Then he would lift the candelabra and proceed into the dark passage. The catacombs are a network of earthen tunnels, lined with shallow ledges. On each of these shelves lays the smiling skeleton of a monk. Brother Daly's body will be laid to rest in this crypt, just like all his predecessors, dating back to the first friends of Crispin, so they say. What fascinated the young Pinocchio seen Warsha about these halls was the myth of their creation. The shrine was built on the site of Crispin's battle. These tunnels had once been the monster's lair. If he could find the origin, the true site of the hero's victory, he would find the portal. The dragon's skeleton was hidden somewhere deep within this crypt. At first, he was responsible. He would explore one tunnel a day. That was the rule he made with himself. Exiting the library, he walked straight down the dark passage. He ignored the rats and jittering insects crawling among the bones. The skeletons did not frighten him. He was familiar with death. The tunnel extended only a few feet before it forked in 3 different directions. "Tomorrow I will start on the left," said Pinocchio. He returned to the staircase and left the shrine. Brother Daly watched from the walls. As he swept the shrines that night, he considered at what point he should intervene, and he came to no conclusions. The next day, the boy was true to his word. He read a fairy story concerning a tailor who was transformed into a mule for his egotism. In his notebook, he scribbled and underlined the word mule. Then he picked up the candelabra and ventured down the tunnel to follow the left-hand path. A subtle drip beckoned him. "This must lead near the bay," Pinocchio whispered. He passed the point where the water fell, 2 fanged rock formations that had excited the boy at first but proved to be nothing. The path curled and he was disappointed when he emerged out of the middle fork back where he had started. "Tomorrow I will explore the path to the right," he said, and he retreated. This branch of the catacombs proved to be more fruitful. Almost every step a new tunnel broke off from the last, so that Pinocchio's exploration went very slowly and spread across several weeks. He began carrying his notebook with him to draw a map of the crypt. There were almost no features to differentiate one tunnel from the next, apart from the occasional dripping stalagmite. These became his markers. He called them dragon teeth, partly to amuse himself, but mostly to give him hope that his quest would lead somewhere. Brother Daly watched his disciple come and go, feeling a strange mixture of pride and fear. The catacombs were uncharted for a reason. They were a sacred mystery and should be left that way. "That's what they say about everything," the monk mumbled to himself, and he immediately fell to his knees before the altar and whispered a solemn incantation of forgiveness. Years passed, and Pinocchio seen Warsha grew into a proud and well-read, if somewhat uneducated, young man. He had spent a great deal of time with the first tome, which he had almost finished. However, the real source of his pride was not the wisdom he had gained in his reading. Contained in the pages of his notebook was a complete map of the underground tunnels. "How have your studies progressed?" asked Brother Daly one day. He had intruded on the young man in the library under the pretense of sweeping the cavern. Warsha was visibly annoyed. The young man spiffed the lapels of his suit jacket and cleared his throat. "I believe I've learned just about everything." "Is that so?" Brother Daly waved to the shelves cluttered with scrolls. "Then I made the right choice in giving you that first selection. Any book would have served the same purpose." "Well, enlighten me." Warsha smiled coolly. The monk had not noticed before, but here in the glow of the candelabra, he saw that his pupil had a serious overbite. "It's nothing." "No, tell me." "It's all nothing." Brother Daly cocked his head. As we have observed, the monks follow a code of invisibility as an expression of their fundamental understanding. This boy, with his journey through the catacombs, not to mention his hours of study, might have come to some enlightenment. "It's all meaningless," Warsha said. He laughed and slapped his hands on the table. The monk gripped his broom firmly. "Careful, that is a very old table." "Forgive me, brother, it's just such a tremendous joke. All these stories, all this work, to find out there's really nothing. The catacombs are empty. There's no dragon. And probably there never was a Crispin either. You know what that story's about. Man is the true monster. Man with his tremendous mechanical mind outwitted nature. Blind, stupid, pointless nature. The divine accident, the curse of death. It can be defeated by the brilliance of man. There are some parts of that where I agree, but I have not ventured as far into the catacombs as you. What did you find in there to make you so certain of your view?" "I just told you, nothing. But the map, which I made. I realized the story, this temple, built by the way by ancient slaves. It is not indicative of the power of God, but the power of man. I'm sorry to pull back the veil, brother, but every aspect of your religion is false. It's all meaningless. We live and we die. The end." "Is that really what you believe?" The young man crossed his arms, hands under the armpits, because they would not have fit into his tight sleeves, the way that Brother Daly's hands did now as he strapped his totem broom to his back and assumed the sacred posture. "Then I believe your time here has come to an end." But I haven't finished the book. Why bother? There's nothing to understand. Warshaw sighed, and he produced a hand, his right hand, from beneath his armpit. He rolled that hand, wafting an onion-rich human odor around the room, and in the same gesture he shrugged. I suppose you're right. Before his eyes, Brother Daly vanished. In fact, the whole room disappeared. Warshaw's ambivalent hand wave had blown out the candelabra. "Brother," said Warshaw into the darkness, "I'm sorry, but it's the truth." There was no response. Alone, Warshaw felt his way through the darkness. He emerged from the body of Crispin into the shrine, where the walls told the story. He stood before the exit, the pretend portal cast by those illustrated runes surrounding it. Not even moonlight shone through the doorway that night. "Nothing," said Warshaw to himself, and he passed through that portal into the ordinary black world. "No wonder the witch got him," said Tangi into her bin of popcorn. Her 3 companions were asleep on the dirt beside her. She leaned back to look up at the shining moon. Once again, she was enraptured with the silver light. This has been Animal Songs, written and performed by Jamie Holcomb, produced by Supermoon. Find us on TikTok, YouTube, or at our website, gosupermoon.com. That's GOSUPERMOON.com. You can also find our work alongside many other talented artists at looksees.com. That's LOOK-SEES.com. This concludes the Worm chapter. I wonder what spirit we will meet next. Until then, thank you for listening.
Glory